In this video, I'm about to break down 17 reasons why entrepreneurs should have a niche-focused podcast if you want to grow fast and monetize as soon as possible. So look, my name is Nwaneri. I'm the co-founder of GetMoreListens.com, a company helping education-based podcasters, business owners, coaches, experts in their field turn a slow growth podcast into a rapidly growing positive ROI show. Over the last 4 years, I've interviewed and coached 350 plus podcasters, and I'm also the co-host of Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing, which generates $10,000 of attributed sales each and every month. Those right there you see at the bottom of the screen, those are my books. I'm also the founder of the leading podcast and book brand under the pen name Daniel Larson. So if you're familiar with those books, you know, I'm the co-author. Anyways, it's not about me. This video is all about you. So let's dive straight in. Reason number one, you have complete clarity around who you're talking to. Now, this might sound blatantly obvious, but after interviewing and coaching 350 plus podcasters, it become very apparent that so many podcasters, the majority of podcasters, in fact, have no clue who their target audience is. They might have a topic that they cover on their show, but in terms of who specifically is on the other side of the mic, listening into each episode, they're very unclear. So for you, having total clarity on who you're speaking to, what does that actually mean? What does that do for you? Well, it means it gives you the conviction to talk about specific pain points, problems, situations, scenarios that your listeners might be facing and going through, without you feeling like you're guessing or hoping. Or when you're having a conversation with your guest, you know exactly which direction to take the conversation, what specific questions to ask your guest, because you know the questions your audience, your target audience that you have in your mind that you're completely 100% clear on would like to ask the guest. Number two, it makes things so much easier to monetize because sponsors don't feel like they're gambling with your audience. Because look, at the end of the day, you want to grow fast, get big, and monetize as soon as possible. You want to get an ROI for your time. And if you're trying to build an audience and one day maybe get some sponsors on board, it's super important you have crystal clarity in terms of who your show is actually targeting, who's listening to your podcast, who the show is for. And sponsors themselves, if you think about it, if you're a sponsor, if you're someone, a company, you're trying to put some money into a podcast or anything at all, you want to make sure that for every dollar you spend, your ad is being put in front of the right audience, in front of the right people. But if you yourself as a podcast don't even know who you're reaching, how will you know what sponsors would actually go well with your audience? You don't. You're basically, again, guessing. And from the sponsor's perspective, they themselves are completely guessing if you yourself aren't clear on who your show is for, who is targeting, and why they should care. Number three, you create better content to serve your audience. Now, here's a simple question. How are you meant to create the best podcast on planet Earth for a specific audience if you don't know who the audience is? How the hell are you meant to make the best podcast on Earth for your listeners if you don't know who your listeners are? If you don't understand what they're going through, if you don't understand their pain points, how can you create the best content for them and serve your audience the best if you don't have a clear targeting and a niche-focused podcast? It's very hard. It's essentially throwing shots in the dark, hoping that you hit, and oftentimes you miss. And if you're someone right now where you want to grow, you have amazing content, you know you don't have so much to share with your audience, but you feel like you're really struggling when it comes to slow and steady growth, really cultivating your audience, really building a highly engaged community, it's probably because you're not super clear on your audience and targeting. How can you build a content strategy if you aren't clear on your audience? How can you content best serve your audience if you aren't clear on who the content is actually for? Number four, it's easier to attract new listeners. Goes without saying, if you have a clear target, if I know that I'm targeting entrepreneurs of podcasts, experts in their field who are struggling with slow and steady growth and podcasting for 2 to 3 years now, I want to turn this low growth show into a positive ROI podcast that gives them far more than it takes, where they're making some money, generating some leads, but also growing at a consistent pace with a complete and clear strategy without the guesswork. If I don't have clarity around that, how the hell am I going to target you? How am I going to target my audience? How are you going to reach the people you want to reach if you yourself didn't know who you want to reach? But when you have a niche focused show, you know, like a YouTube channel or a podcast, that's for a specific person, entrepreneurs of podcasts, struggling with a specific problem, slow and steady growth. You want a specific desired outcome, a rapidly growing positive ROI show. It's very clear. So it's easy for me then to create content, my show name, my episodes, my energy, what I talk about, when I know who my audience are, when I have a niche focused podcast. But when you don't have that for yourself, is again, it's total guesswork. You can't really attract people with ease because you don't really know what's going to attract the people you're trying to attract in the first place. You see? Number five, you have more direction of what content to post on social media to engage your audience. And again, it goes back to attracting the right listeners. When you have a niche focused podcast, not only is your promotionals online far more effective because you're speaking to your audience directly and they feel like you're talking to them, the content itself, because it's for them, when a stranger online discovers your show, reads your promotion, feels like it's made for them, and they take that next step to listen to your podcast, and the entire content strategy, the topics you're covering on your show is speaking to them directly, you're far more likely to then have a loyal listener. Versus when you don't have a niche focused show and your front end, when you're promoting online, is very broad, generalized, not speaking to anyone specifically. Even if someone did go on to discover your show and listen, and they look at your back catalog and look at past episode, because every single episode isn't made with them in mind, it's so much harder to attract, engage, and retain that listener long term. Number 6, you'll grow faster because your social media content is more engaging. So that kind of builds on the back of point number 5. You are going to grow much faster if your social media content is speaking to an audience, is attracting the right people and gaining the attention, the right attention. Then you're going to grow much faster with those two things combined. Number 7, you'll increase your recurring listenership as people know exactly what to expect. When you have a niche focused podcast and every single episode is for a specific audience, right? People, I'm going to go back to this example. Entrepreneurs and experts of podcasts looking to turn a slow growth show into a rapidly growing positive ROI show. When every single one of my episodes are speaking directly to that audience and the title is crafted in a way to grab that listener's attention and have a niche focused show, what are the chances that you do that and you actually create great content for that audience who do discover your show? What are the chances that those listeners don't come back for more? When the entire show is made with them to help them solve a specific problem, to help them get to a specific desired outcome, to help them get to a life that they want. This is how you stack the odds in your favor to get people coming back for more. But people can't come back for more when they don't know what to expect, when every episode is talking about something that's not relevant to them, when they're picking and choosing what episode to potentially listen to, instead of binging your entire back catalog, instead of binging your entire content, instead of becoming a super fan of your show because it's specifically made for them in their situation. Number 8, you'll build niche fame and become recognized for covering a specific topic. Now, when you have niche fame, which essentially means being a very highly recognized authority within a small niche, the niche that you're in, it's so much easier to build up that niche fame amongst a much tighter group of people who are going for a specific thing, and you're the go-to guy for that topic because the entire show is made for them. Your niche, you're focused, you're targeted. It feels like it's made for them. But when it's a broad show covering a bunch of different topics, it's hard for you to build up that niche fame. It's very hard to be an expert in so many different things. If I had a podcast that's about business, personal development, mental health, speaking to experts all about content, it's much harder for me to build that niche fame to become the go-to resource for my listeners and my audience, and for you to do the same for yours when you're covering a bunch of different topics. But when I have just a specific niche that I'm targeting, entrepreneurs and experts of podcasts who are looking to turn a slow growth show into a rapidly growing positive ROI podcast, it's so much easier for me to become a recognized person and build niche fame because I'm covering this one specific topic for this specific audience. So much easier. Number 9, you can attract more quality guests because you have niche fame. So again, when you become a recognized person within your industry, within your niche, and people know of you within this space, getting high quality guests, other guests who are also within your space because you're a recognized person and they want to be associated with your brand, it's so much easier again to get those high quality guests. If you have a general show, it's harder for you to build niche fame. When it's hard for you to build niche fame and you're not recognized within your industries, it's harder for you to convince quality guests to come and be a guest on your show. And the other piece I didn't add onto this as well, when you do get a high quality guest to come onto your show and they bring their audience on board, because you have niche fame and because your entire podcast is targeted specifically to match the audience that they are going to bring onto your podcast, right? So you invite someone on to be a guest on your show, they share it with their audience listen to the podcast that they were a guest on, that being your podcast. Because the content strategy and because the podcast is made for that audience, they're not just going to come in, support the guest and leave. They're going to come in, love the episode, I'm hoping, and then look at your back catalog, look at your podcast and see like, oh my God, this podcast is literally made for me. Holy crap. And now be able to turn far more of each of your guests' audience that they bring onto the show into your own, and again adds into the recurring listenership and builds on your podcast, helping you grow month after month. Number 10, you'll have way more fun growing because again your podcast is actually growing, right? Like just simply put, you can do a podcast for a long time, and what I found anyway after speaking to tons of podcasters and entrepreneurs is the podcast is fun. It's so much fun. You'll be able to meet amazing people, have huge impact, right? But after a little while, you start asking yourself, well, why isn't the show growing? Why have I plateaued? How can I reach more people? And it turns from having just been completely fun to being something you're kind of a bit anxious about, a bit worried about, a bit concerned about. So that starts kicking in. But when you have a niche show and you're growing month after month, you have so much more fun because again, you're finally growing faster. You're not just like stuck in this limbo phase, right? 11, you can monetize way easier because you know what exactly your audience wants. Again, it goes back to the point number 2. If you have a program, if you have a coaching program or a low ticket offer or a high ticket offer or anything like that, where you have a business and you want to attract customers and clients from the podcast, when you have a niche show, you have a niche fame, you have content speakers to their problems, their pain points, and you're helping them solve those problems, and you're building that recognition in your industry, and you're the one positioned as an authority, it's so much easier for you then to turn those listeners into clients because you're the go-to guy for the job. When you don't have that, monetization becomes much harder. Number 12, podcast SEO is much better when you have content that's related to a main keyword. So when you have a niche and you know a specific keyword, so again, podcast SEO is the process of having your show rank higher on Apple and Spotify specifically. This is a great way to be discovered by new listeners. Podcast SEO means having keywords in your show name, your episode titles. So when someone searches in a problem or a keyword, your show is discovered if it's optimized for podcast SEO. It's very hard to optimize your podcast for podcast SEO when you're covering so many different topics and you don't have a niche fame. You don't have a specific keyword, a topic, and an audience you're targeting all the bloody time. But when you do have a niche, you can specifically target that niche. For example, entrepreneurs of podcast, consistently in your show name, episode titles, show notes, everywhere, and start ranking for those keywords. So when someone types in podcast for entrepreneurs, you are now ranked higher. Of course, this example I'm giving for myself. So it's actually much easier for you to rank higher when you have a niche focused content. And what it means is there's going to be less competition as well, because again, you're constantly covering this topic. So Apple and Spotify know what your show is all about. 13, you have more exposure and reach on Apple and Spotify. That builds onto the last one, right? When you get more exposure, you become more discovered. And when you're more discovered, your show grows because new listeners are finding you on autopilot without you have to do a bunch of grunt work. Number 14, you'll have a highly engaged community who have the same shared interest. Super simple. You have a niche show, covering a specific target for a specific type of audience. When you build a community that's on Facebook, that's on your email list, they're going to be highly engaged because again, they feel like your content is highly relevant for them. When you don't have a niche and you're speaking about different topics and speaking to different, guests, it can be a lot trickier. It's not impossible. It is a lot more time. It's a lot more strenuous, and it's just harder. That just as simple as that, right? Whereas when it's a niche, building a highly engaged community who have the same interests, going through the same problem, who want the exact same thing, is a very easy to build a community around a podcast like that. Number 15, you'll have way more impact with your audience. Kind of builds on again to the last point. When every episode is helping your audience solve a specific problem, it's so much easier for you to attract those people to make an actual difference because you know exactly what they're going through. You can help them the best you possibly can. Number 16, when you become a guest on other people's podcasts, you grow much faster because again, you have a similar audience who like a particular topic. So when you're now featuring other people's shows, you're again building your niche, you become the go-to person for that topic. You're able to grow much faster because again, you have similar audience to their own. Because you have a niche. But when you don't have a niche, you're just going to guest on a bunch of different podcasts who don't necessarily overlap with your own. And then it's harder for you to turn some of their listeners into your own. And even if you turn some of their listeners to your own and they check out your podcast, it's hard for you to then convince them to become a loyal listener when every single episode is a niche focused. You see my point? Number 17, it's easier to sell a product and make more money. It's as simple as that. I'm going to go back to this point. Probably repeated a few points, but I want to just iterate this again and again and again. It's so much easier to monetize when you have a niche focused show because you know exactly who they are, what they want, what they're going through, and how best to sell them. So look, if you're struggling to grow your podcast, I'll just suggest start by niching down. And if you're not sure how to niche down and how to become more specific, here are some ways to help you decide. Number 1, go with your passion. Audience am I most passionate about serving? Number 2, experience. What audience am I best equipped to serve? Ask yourself those questions. Who am I actually best equipped to serve? Number 3, what does the data tell you? Look at your past episodes and the topics that seem to be trending higher than others. What topics does your audience love, right? So these are 3 different ways of deciding what audience to target. For me personally, I genuinely believe the best way is to go with experience. What audience are you best equipped to serve? Here's why. Number 1, you can build real authority because you are an authority. You have the experience. Your content has more weight because your content can have so much more depth because you have got that experience. You've gone through it yourself. Maybe it's a pain point. Maybe it's a specific problem you've solved in your life. Maybe you had anxiety and you overcame anxiety. Maybe you're overweight and you lost weight. Maybe you're a business owner who scaled from, 5 figures per month to 6 figures per month. Whatever the transformation is that you have the most experience in, cover that on your show. And finally, podcasting is so competitive. So when you can talk about something you're most experienced in and you're best equipped to serve your audience, it's so much easier to stand out because there's only one you. No one can compete with you. Whereas if you talk about different topics that you're not really too sure about, you're not necessarily interested in, or you are interested in, but you haven't got that depth of knowledge to position you as authority, it's so much harder to compete and win. Again, you can do it. It just takes so much longer. And look, here's some past clients. One of our clients who went through this rebrand and actually became more specific. And you see the results here. There's a client called Ben. His old podcast is called Break the Chains of 9 to 5. Again, general, personal development, make money online stuff. Then we focused in on this niche of what he was most experienced in, which was for him, electrician. Who was a six-figure electrician. He was self-employed and he transitioned from corporate to then going and working for himself. He then made the podcast, new podcast, rebranded, repositioned, targeted that specific audience. And then he went from 0 to 5,000 monthly downloads literally in 90 days. Other clients like Carl here, who went from investor teacher, a general podcast about, financial freedom, to the Canadian Wealth Mastery, specifically targeting, high net worth individuals in Canada looking to build their wealth through specific tax saving strategies and wealth strategies. Again, super specific. And you see the growth. He literally went from January getting just under 200 downloads per week to now in May getting 1,000 downloads per week with an all-time high. And this is what he sends us, day in, day out within our Slack channel, right? So this stuff does work. Having a niche and being niche focused as an entrepreneur is so important. If you want to grow fast, get big and monetize as soon as possible. So once you build your niche, don't feel like you're going to be just pigeonholed and talk about a specific topic. Once you build that know, like, and trust, then you can start to branch out, talk about different topics, but start here if you're struggling to grow. If you're trying to grow fast and you're wondering, should I niche down? Ask yourself, would you be happy with all the benefits you spoke about on this video? If the answer is yes, then just go for it. So look, there you have it. 17 reasons why entrepreneurs should have a niche focused podcast. If that's you, I'm hoping I've done a bit of convincing, maybe not, or you let me know down in the comment section. And of course, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and binge the entire back catalog. We're building the #1 education platform for entrepreneurs, experts with podcasts. If that's you, feel free to subscribe and peace out.